welcome to ADAPT's Digital Edge 2021. Thank you for joining us today. And I'd like to start with asking you a little bit about your role and the organization you work for.
Okay, so I'm the Head of Strategy and Growth at Hearing Australia, and we are the preeminent hearing solutions provider in Australia. We've been here for more than 70 plus years. Our main aim is to look after the hearing health of all Australians.
And hearing aid companies and hearing health has definitely transformed over the past decade. What's disrupting your industry at the moment?
I think if you think of traditional hearing aids, they tend to be big and clunky, very noticeable, and there's a stigma. People find it uncomfortable, people find it really embarrassing to wear it. What we're finding really interesting is that our industry is potentially being disrupted by technology. So for example, Apple, through its EarPods, potentially could be testing your hearing through apps that come out through iOS. We're seeing companies like Bose with their headphones potentially also doubling up as low-level hearing aids. So there's a lot of, I would say, new developments out there that's really changing the way hearing loss is being diagnosed digitally, the way hearing aids are evolving as well. So now you can get those new ones that basically almost invisible, small and tiny, connected to Bluetooth. You can take calls with your hearing aids. So it's evolving to something that is just beyond imagination. And I think it's about how quickly we can adapt, offer those to our clients, and making sure that we also inform and educate them about how to use it. Because I think while all these new technologies are coming out, which is great, if the end user doesn't use it, then it becomes obsolete. So I think the adoption is something that also will be quite important for us as well.
And how do you manage adoption? How do you manage kind of the creation and getting the business aligned? Obviously you're heading up strategy within Hearing Australia. What are some of the factors that you need to go through to be a success?
I think one of the key transformations that we've undergone lately is to make sure that we are more customer focused. So having a CX department on board has really made us more customer centric, because previously it used to be a very clinical company driven kind of philosophy where the audiologist knows best and would prescribe what's the best solution for the customer. Right now, I think we're trying to turn things on its head and basically be customer-led. So letting the customer guide us in terms of what they want, what good feels like, and then building that into our end-to-end journeys, understanding how a customer will want to discover hearing aids. On average, it takes a person 7 years to take action from the time they discover they've got a hearing loss to the time they actually do something about it. And one of the things that we are trying to do is to say, how do we shorten that pathway to a solution? And focus groups, having frank conversations with our clients. And that's when we discovered that there's actually a big stigma to people actually acknowledging even that they've got a hearing loss. Very often, one of the things that I hear very often from our customers is that they pretend that they can hear until a family member or a friend basically says that you're shouting, or hold on, I think that person didn't really get what I was saying. So I think destigmatizing is a really important thing, but also being customer-led in terms of how they want to be engaged.
Okay. Well, from what you're saying there, it sounds like there's a change happening in the business. To go from the practitioner designing the hearing aid or the solution and the business being driven that way, and now being customer-led, there probably is a change within the literacy within the organisation and how the organisation reacts to new products or services. Do you see a digital literacy flowing through the organisation now, which may have been different to years ago?
Absolutely. I think what COVID did and forced us to do was to have a more digital end-to-end solution, because the customers physically couldn't come to the clinics. So we had to find a way for us to engage with them, either in diagnosis or just getting the hearing aid out to them. But I think another thing that's also quite interesting as well is the education and information for our customers using digital means. You know, how do we basically put things on YouTube or in a digital format that the customer can digest easily and learn how to use their hearing aid without necessarily coming into the clinic, getting ongoing diagnosis. And one of the interesting things as well that has changed is the way that we would put on our website, or the way that we engage customers in a more customer-friendly rather than a medical terminology of describing a hearing aid. So previously we would say, this hearing aid has this kind of decibels, can do this, very technical, means nothing to the customer. Now we describe it such that, you know, if you want to be able to hear the sounds in the opera, if you want to hear raindrops on the roof, if you want to be able to hear your spouse talking in the next room, you know, describing it in the language that the customer can resonate with, I think that's been the biggest change, because that's what people react to. If you just describe a technically correct product, it means nothing to them if they can't digest it. So I think that change has also been quite exciting.
Fantastic. And the year 2020, we obviously saw CIOs, heads of technology, heads of strategy get elevated to a much higher role and really be needed by the board and by the C-level, really be depended on for the strategy of their business to survive and thrive. Did any of those kind of changes or change management pieces happen within Hearing Australia?
Absolutely. I think we had to basically, I know we use this word quite often, pivot, but we literally had to pivot very quickly due to the fact that we couldn't engage physically with our customers. And the board was supportive, but also very focused in terms of we still need to make sure that the business was viable. We still had a mission to meet our customers' needs. So I think it was more how can they be more supportive in giving us the tools or the support or the guidance that's needed. And I think what's been really comforting is that I think COVID made the board and management and employees work more cohesively, more frequently. There wasn't that us and them mentality as such anymore, but more like, okay, we're all in this together, what can we do? And I think that's a nice development, that it became working together for the right solution that works, rather than, you know, producing a report that the board endorses and then it becomes just a formality. So I think COVID has made it more democratic in a way.
Yeah, and a lot of our community have been saying, you know, COVID empowered them to get 10 months worth of transformation done in 10 weeks. What I would say is, in terms of maybe some of the direction that the board have been having, or even higher management, have they been leaning on data or data-driven decisions to make the business run effectively?
Yeah, I think one of the things that we needed to really grow up quickly was to be more data literate and also more data savvy. But because I think what we tend to rely on was a lot of past knowledge, but it's not as current. And I think being data driven meant that basically not only could we be more real time in terms of the solutions that we're giving, but it's more targeted. But I think coming back to being digitally and data driven, COVID was a peculiar time. It forced us all to do things really quickly, which was good. But one of the things in strategy that I found was that we cobbled together things really quickly. We had to get things out really quickly. So it wasn't a sustainable long-term proposition. A lot of it was quite clunky and basically kind of like put together with sellotape. But the idea was that we had to get something out fast, but it wasn't necessarily something that was built to last. So I think in a post-COVID world, one of the things that I'm quite keen to make sure is that as we're going more digital, as we're being more data-driven, we need to be smart about how we're doing both in a sustainable way, in a way that is not only economical, but works for the organization and the customers for the long term, because these short-term measures that were cobbled together served its purpose in that point in time, but it's not something that we could continue, I would say, grappling with without significant change.
And maybe lastly, on the point of change, Adapt have been producing a lot of research over the last 12 months in terms of the change of workplace design, how people work, where people work, what does work look like. We're seeing factors now of shrinkage in properties, sizes within cities, and we've seen mental health come high up in surveys and in feedback from our community as an area that they're really focusing on right now. What kind of big changes do you think are going to stay post-COVID within your own organisation?
I think, as in many organisations, it's being comfortable to say that we are an organisation that the employee can and should decide where they choose to work and when. And I think it's trying to get away from that mentality that we have to be in the office together for things to work. I think COVID has proven that we can still get a lot of things done by working virtually and working more smartly together. But I think one of the things that I'm quite keen to make sure of is that as we go more virtual and more digital in our interactions as staff in the workplace, we don't lose that spontaneity that you get from the physical environment, because when you're working virtually on Microsoft Teams and Zoom and so on, the spontaneity is not there. You don't just meet someone in the corridor and then have that conversation about, hey, what project are you working on? Oh, okay, that's interesting. I've got some information that you could use, because by virtue of being virtual, you actually have to schedule an interaction. So I think it's still trying to work out how to engender that spontaneity, but also at the same time, it's trying to make sure that people don't go back to old habits. So I think we force a lot of online collaboration, working on live documents together. But ever since things started to return back to almost normal, people have resorted to their old ways of emailing documents or putting things on their hard drive. So I think it's how do we make sure that all the good things that happened during COVID we maintain, and then we continue to encourage that good thing from going on.
So Conrad, we've been here today at Digital Edge, which is Adapt's premier digital transformation and customer experience event. We've been looking at the theme of scaling digital-first strategies and customer experience agility. We've seen some brand new research this morning, which was published by the team, and a number of fantastic keynotes from industry leaders. What have you thought about the presentations and the quality of research that you've seen this morning?
I think it's always good to have these two things resonate with me. One is to confirm a lot of the hunches that we've always had, that look, those were the right things to pursue, so staying the course. And the second thing was to debunk some of the myths that we thought were still there. So one of the things that I really enjoyed was to see how all these different technologies were mashing up together, like AI on the cloud, for example, or the thing that got me excited was how medical and physical are merging, which is what we're also seeing in my industry as well. And I think it's always good to be reminded by the data and the surveys and the research to say, is this really what's happening in the market? But for me, in strategy, one of the things that I always need to balance is to say, will all these new developments cater to just a very small niche in the market that I'm playing with, or is it going to go mainstream? Because that would change the kind of decisions that we would need to make as a company. If it's going to be mainstream and it's inevitable, it would basically mean really changing the way that we operate. So that's a big thing. If it basically is a very niche thing, then it's more about how soon will it go mainstream, because that means that we have some time to change or to turn things around. But if it's going to be still a very, very small segment, we have to basically look at the commercials of it. So I think there are practical aspects to innovation. One is to be excited about it, but another is to also say, what does it mean from a business perspective, whether or not it makes economical sense.
Fantastic. And all of the research presented today has been domestic. It's been Australia, New Zealand first. Is it refreshing having those types of insights at your fingertips? And you know, in terms of global markets, do you see kind of differences here to the rest of the world, or are they quite similar?
One of the interesting things about hearing Australia and the hearing industry is Australia is actually one of the leaders in the hearing industry. So actually, it's one of those rare things where the world looks to us in terms of the developments. If you think about Cochlear, developed here in Australia, and a lot of the good work that's being done within the hearing sector. So I think one of the things that I'm also interested in is to say what's happening in like Silicon Valley, or what's happening in Europe or in other parts of Asia where there could be new developments happening from left field, from apps, from softwares, from maybe different mobile phone providers or technology development. So I think that's basically what would be of interest to me. Definitely having a more local feel to the research was beneficial because Hearing Australia is predominantly serving the local market. So that also helps me to understand, well, where do we need to play over the next couple of months and next couple of years if we want to cement our predominance in the local market.